Hello everybody, welcome to this week's Kindly webinar on child protection and neglect in the early years. My name is Tracy and I'm your host for this evening. Thank you very much for joining us. It's a pleasure to welcome tonight safeguarding consultant Anne-Marie Christian to talk to us about this very important topic. Welcome, Anne-Marie.
Hi, thank you for the invitation, Tracy. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Great to have you with us.
Good evening. I appreciate some colleagues are from around the world, so good night to some. We've got people from other countries, from the UK and different parts. And again, thank you so much for giving up your time to be part of this conversation, should I say. So, you know, obviously we're in an interesting time at the moment with COVID, the lockdown. And we know at the start there was a bit of a delay when in referring to children's social care when it came to concerns about children. And around the world, it looks very different in how we then continue to keep children safe within our settings. So today I'm going to talk a lot about the current situation, but also what's really happening. So in that, I think it's important that I just introduce who I am and what qualifies me today to be here, to be invited to come and talk to you about neglect. So this seminar is going to be, or this webinar is going to be an hour. So we said 45 minutes for the actual conversation, and then we're going to have 15 minutes Q&A. However, in that, I've done a few of these, and I appreciate that when I'm talking about something, you might want some more particular conversation around that point. So if that's the case, please just put your point in the chat. And again, Tracy will let me know and I can answer or add it to the conversation I'm currently having. Okay, so what brings me here? So my background, a social worker of 24 years qualified, and I did a bit of residential social work before that, before I qualified. But in my whole career, I'm reflecting on today really, and early years, I was thinking, wow, I've always been involved in the 0 to 5 throughout my whole career. Even as a social work student, I remember doing my 12-week child observation that we're all familiar with when we did our training. And even then, how powerful it was for us as kind of practitioners to pick up on the kind of communication that children are, you know, expressing or lack of sometimes because of fright, etc. And we can pick up so much from that. So reminding us about the power of child observation. And also, one thing also, how vulnerable they are, how vulnerable the young little ones are, and are also unborn as well. So I want to mention unborn in our conversation today, you know, woman with child, unborn baby. So when I managed a child protection team for the local authority as a social work manager, I managed a 0 to 5 team and I was based in a children's centre. And I remember how, I would say raw is one of the first words that came into my head, how blatant it was sometimes, almost overnight, when a woman was pregnant and then clearly from the pregnancy sometimes triggered jealousy or other things for the partner, and then how it kind of also would bring on other parts of emotional abuse, neglect and potential domestic abuse. So it's really important that we capture the unborn in our conversation today. And again, on the screen, you can see I was you're also a local authority trainer. You know, I was a LADO for 4 years in education. And then 2010, and again, I was reflecting on that this evening, I left the front line. So when I was a social worker, I remember being one of my first jobs, I worked for one of the rural boroughs. And back then we were having link workers for different kind of organisations. And I was the link worker for the local authority nursery and also the Women's Refuge. And I remember then again, the protection and the whole impact all of those things had on those young children. But what kind of prompted me to leave the front line in 2010 was I was managing a 0 to 5 team, and I had a case where the mother herself had a history of potential mental health. And I remember I wanted to fund a childminder for 3 months to support this lady in her crisis that she had postnatal depression, etc. And yes, she was known to us, but she was doing very well, but she had kind of a few cracks around her not coping. And I wanted to support that through my team. So I did a bid in relation to a pack of a care plan, what it would look like, etc. She had a 9-year-old as well. And unfortunately, it was declined. And I'm just thinking, wow, you know, we need to support this person in a crisis, help her over this kind of hurdle. It was declined. And unfortunately, what unravelled shortly after that, within a few weeks, was it was a crisis intervention of Section 47. And then other things happened. And for me, my principles was actually, you know, I'm just being reactive. I'm being in a crisis point where actually we need to be more proactive. So I left the front line, and since 2010, I'm independent and I work for lots of organizations. I'm an associate trainer and a consultant with the NSPCC, and I deliver the national training of the safeguarding lead or safeguarding officer, supervision training, trainer, and all those other ones. And I meet lots of colleagues who do kind of child protection generally. And also I write. So I was asked to write an article back in 2003 around social work in school when I was based in the school. And then I was then kind of encouraged to continue my writing. And then I write again still. I've written a few times for Nursery World. I recently did one for Pacey around neglect, actually, similar to what we're talking about today, but from a different angle. And I do lots of other things as well. So I'm here giving you the overview of my frontline experience in child protection, but also I was involved in 2 serious case reviews where neglect was part of that. So my strapline to you today would be, think the unthinkable, and it could happen here. So I know in the last week, I've heard of a local nursery where unfortunately a child had died. Again, we're not sure how and why, but potentially any child that comes into your sight in your role, you know, it's your duty of care to pick up and ensure that the child's safe, but also pick up that they've been treated safe by the people who presented them to you. And on top of that, it's just remembering it could happen here. So ensuring that in your setting, you know who your safeguarding lead is, that they've had relevant training, you know how to whistle blow, and also you know how to contact the local authority, children's social care, and also the LADO being the person who deals with allegations as well. So it's just really important that regardless of your role, you know, if you're a childminder, same thing, you know who that go-to person is in the local authority of where the child resides, by the way, not where you are based, because it's about the locality who deal with the residents in that area. And again, I've been doing public speaking for quite a while, again, from that original role in the school where I was asked to go around and talk about the success of the inclusion project and being preventative within education of safeguarding. I do international safeguarding as well, done that for 4 years, and I kind of travel the world. So I appreciate we've got colleagues from Dubai here. Hi. I was due to go over there, but obviously with lockdown, I'm waiting to be released back. So I appreciate the cultural challenges we have across the world, even in the UK, you know, generally around values, belief systems, and we'll explore that today. It's quite important we understand that when it comes to childcare. So ground rules, just reminding you really that, you know, look after yourself. We're in an interesting space at the moment with lockdown, with COVID. We've heard more news today. I'm not sure what it's like internationally, but we're locking down again for a little bit, reducing numbers from Monday going forward. So there's lots of anxieties around. So just look after yourself, because I know there's lots of panic around of how we will survive. And I appreciate the sector in itself, early years sectors, has been affected in lots of ways for financial, etc. So please look after yourself. And yes, we'll have this conversation. And again, remembering that we're all different, we've got our own values, and appreciating that some people might have opinions and others that, you know, in our session of chats, there might be people saying things that we may not agree with, but respecting where they're coming from. Obviously, we know about confidentiality, and if anyone does mention anything that we feel breaches that based on, you know, safeguarding matter, again, I'll speak to Tracy at the end about what we do with that. So mobile phones on silent. We know we're giving up our evening for this. So our social time. So please ensure that you either message them when they call, or, you know, if you need to take that urgent call, please do. So yeah, you know, why neglect? So I have been asked quite a lot recently to talk about this subject. And it's just interesting. We've learned a lot about neglect throughout the years. So a lot of you already know about neglect. Over the last few years, there's been information around affluent neglect. I was doing some training yesterday in a prep school, and in this prep school there was a nanny there who came up to me in the break and I wanted to have a conversation with me about things that she was seeing in her family that she was working with, and she felt unable to challenge, again, knowing that the people who she's, you know, potentially raising concerns about were her employers, but also she you know, that she's living there, etc., etc. So it was one where for her it was a very difficult conversation to have, and again, she was worried about the well-being of the child. So I appreciate today we've got childminders, we've got colleagues in early year settings, and again, a mixed bag, and understanding that, as this statement is saying, it's important that we can't ignore those signs of neglect. And again, what I've learned through my experiences has been some parents aren't aware of the impact it's having. Some parents and caregivers believe the child's too young to understand or remember, or they'll recover, or all those other factors. And again, we find that sometimes there's parents who choose not to, or parents that are just unable to provide that care. And again, with affluent neglect, sometimes we know about paid care, which is fine. But again, it's about the reality. This came up in another school I was doing recently around affluent neglect, of them telling me about parents not spending time, quality time with their child. And at what point is that neglectful? You know, as in kind of identity, self-esteem, feeling wanted to be loved and valued, rather than having people continuously looking after you on behalf of your parents. So it's an interesting conversation, and I appreciate in some cultures, again, it's the social norm where, you know, there's a maid there who looks after the children, and the parents just do what they do. And at times there is a family, but most of the time the care, you know, the kind of nanny or maid, in whatever language is called, would be the person who is there taking care of the children. So I appreciate what it looks like on the ground, but my conversation would be, if you really believe, as a practitioner, being that person working with children, that the person who's in charge, i.e. the nanny or the, you know, person, the paid carer, who has no power over the children, i.e. they're belittled or not taken seriously, and the children, you know, talk over them, etc., then how can that person potentially care for those children when they don't listen to them? So the whole thing about, if you fail to follow instructions under health and safety, that could be a safeguarding issue. So if you're out on the, you know, in the public, for example, on a busy road, and the child chooses not to respond or follow the instructions of the person who's caring for them, that's potential neglect, you know, in relation to a safeguarding issue. And it's not about them neglecting, it's about the whole setup not being right. And I've had a few conversations with various colleagues over the years, and I remember there was a theme once of young 17-year-old girls coming over to the UK as au pairs, who've never left home before, who've never been in front of a child before, and looking after, you know, young children. And some, you know, childcare settings were saying that they really didn't have no understanding of children or structure, and again, no authority over the children, to the point where it was a safeguarding issue, clearly. And then we spoke to the parents, and they made them understand what they were seeing based on the potential risk. And then it was actually challenged and taken care of. So I suppose I'm just telling you that because it's just understanding that, you know, sometimes people just tick the box to say, it's okay, we've got someone looking after the children. And again, what I see there in practice is basic care is not being, you know, might be provided, but anything else isn't. So yeah, this is just important about neglect. And I think it's interesting. Some of you might know in education, we've got a document called Keeping Children Safe in Education. So the teachers and education colleagues are the only, so any of you in a maintained nursery would know this, that you have to read part 1 every year of Keeping Children Safe in Education. And it's a document where, I'll get my copy here, it's right in my bag. It's a document where you're expected, we've just amended it in the UK for 2020. This is what it looks like for 2020. So if you're not familiar with it, if you go on the DfE, Department for Education website, it kind of shows you this. And we now, in this, for example, they now say that it's child abuse and neglect. So even the definition itself has changed. So if you're not familiar with it, again, I'll send the link to Tracy at the end, and she can send it to you after. But that's a good guidance to read. And good practice would be, anyone, if you do work in a nursery, you encourage your staff to read it. So in schools, it's statutory. They all have to read that document, part 1, and also sign to say they've read it and understood it. And I do appreciate why, because compared to social workers and police officers, we only see children when we're called, when there's a crisis. You guys see children for long hours in a day, and you see them sometimes more than their families. So I think it's just right that actually you are those people who actually raise those concerns. I've got a question, and I will. All right, I'll answer that in a minute. Okay, so I'll come back to that question. So thank you for that person. I'll just try and close the box now, which I can't.
Yeah, it's fine. I'll monitor those for you,
All right, okay.
and I'll let you know if anything comes up. Okay.
All right, I'm trying to close the box, but I'm trying to. I don't have to close the box on that. Sorry. Do you know how to close it? No.
Top right of the box. Oh, that's the. You've stopped sharing your screen now.
All right, that's fine. I'll. It's gone now. Right. Am I still sharing my screen? There you go. I've gone back on. Is that better? I'm back.
Yeah, you're back.
All right, fair enough. So I'll do the questions at the end because it didn't distract me, so I'll just flow. So definitely neglect is something, and again, my motto is think the unthinkable and it could happen here. And remembering within this, we've got to be thinking of the toxic trio. It's a classic theme that we see in lots of cases. And toxic trio, I'm sure you all know, is substance misuse, mental health, and domestic abuse. So what we say is, you know, we know about the adverse childhood, you know, effects, etc., and how it impacts on children. But also, we know that regardless of how young the child was, you know, brain forming, etc., how they, you know, it can impact on their development, learning, etc. And with the toxic trio, we know that whether it is non-recent or recent, we kind of know when there's a crisis, people can actually relapse and go back to that particular time where they don't cope well, and they go back to that place of, you know, crisis. So it's just remembering that. And toxic trio is definitely a theme we see. So if you have got, you know, people you're working with who, again, with affluent families, they check into private hospitals, you wouldn't be aware of that. They don't have to share the information with you, where NHS or local authority kind of settings, you tend to have a more kind of open conversation where you might be notified by the hospital or something, or by the, you know, the health visitor around certain things. So it's just being aware of that particular thing. And also during lockdown, I'm not sure again internationally the impact, but we know about two things. Digital poverty was something we learned, isn't it? Digital poverty, and also pressure cooker environment are two words. And again, a child who's living in an environment where there's pressure and stress is neglectful, because potentially they're walking on eggshells. And we'll see later on when I kind of continue to talk, are their basic needs being met? You know, and that's what it comes down to. So I'll continue to kind of go forward. Another thing we say is this family, are the parent caregivers doing their best? And is it good enough parenting? Because good enough parenting, we know there's no perfect parenting. And again, you would worry if there was perfect parenting, because we know in life, for example, we've got 80% good, positive times, and then 20% conflict. And that conflict should be kind of conflict that is reasonable, that doesn't impact on the child or frighten child. So sometimes in cases I'd have everyone argues, it's normal. I want my children to see what life's really like. Yes, but you don't have to have aggression in there. You know, my conversation would be to these families, yes, you can, you're absolutely right, but you shouldn't be shouting and screaming in front of your children, but scaring them because they love both parents. So it's a conversation around speaking when the children aren't around, but remember the tone of the voice, children are still in the home and they feel the atmosphere. So it's really important that whether it's couple conflict, and again, that's a word I've heard quite a lot of the time, you know, couple conflict, everyone has a bit of conflict. Yes, but not consistently or not frequently to the point where it's a weekly occurrence. You know, I've had cases that were then daily occurrence. They just couldn't stand each other, but they were in the same house, no one was budging, and these children were living in a very nervous environment. So that's neglectful because they don't appreciate, and it was called out to them, hence by the social work department, about it and how it is impacting on the well-being of the child. And we had to escalate it to almost care proceedings where we serve them notice, and that's when they realized, wow, the Children's Act says the welfare of the child is paramount, and we are potentially putting our child through emotional abuse and neglect. And that's why eventually they had to realize it was illegal based on the law. So we'll talk about that today, because I think it's important that you need to know how far you can go with engagement with families when you do have a concern, low level concern. And what do you expect from that? Do you expect kind of a conversation of engagement? So with medical neglect, for example, we say, you know, at the moment, a lot of young children now would have been stuck in front of TVs for the last 6 months. Juice, you know, whatever they're drinking, maybe not the kind of, you know, oral hygiene they should be having, okay? So I know I spoke to a dentist the other day from Harley Street around the consultancy thing we had, and she said there are going to be more children with tooth decay. So if you have got children coming back with tooth decay, you've got to be thinking of, okay, the child's in pain, you need to take them to the dentist within 24 hours, or maybe the walk-in, whatever it might be. By giving families a timeline, then you can go back to them to say, how did you get on? So whether it's the opticians, the dentist, the walk-in, the A&E hospital, whatever, GP, by giving families deadlines, that's when you're controlling the whole environment around, we're concerned about your child. Please, as a family, can you take the child to be seen and supported around that? And then you go back to them. So there's little things you can do sooner and being very accurate. Also, don't hide behind emails. I say this to a lot of settings, you know, you have a conversation, you might back it up in an email or whatever, or letter, but don't just type the emails, because that particular family might have left that job or actually not read it properly. And again, people read what they want to read. And in a serious case of you, of a mother who took her 2 children's life, there was an element there of a middle-class family where they were quite dominant in how they controlled all the conversations via emails. And no one was brave enough to challenge them because they were in fear of them. So it's just important, again, with neglect, that the sooner we have that conversation and can take that power back to say no, as a nanny state, meaning as a provider, the legislation. So internationally, we've got the Unicef rights of the child, and every child's got the right to feel loved, be safe, etc. And with that in mind, it's again, it's important that we champion that and ensure that parents are aware that they've got a duty of care to put their children first. Okay. So, you know, this is the legislation in England, the Children's Act, but it's just reminding us. And I always say to colleagues when they're talking about Anne-Marie neglect, what do you think? Is it persistent? Is it continuous over a short period of time? Because there will be certain factors that on its own, you could argue was actually, you know, accidental or a one-off or, you know, isolated, rather than actually being a consistent thing. Example, family are running late, they woke up late, or things happen at home. They drop the child off to your setting, the nappy soiled. Okay, you could argue the child just did it in the car. Compared to continuously, maybe 3 or 4 times a week, where actually they just haven't been bothered to change the child when they got up in the morning, and now the child's a bit sore. An element of actually, you know, you need to be changing them, all those little things. You know, I remember a simple conversation with a parent once in a child protection team where she said, does that mean I've got a, and it's snowing, it was kind of February time, icy. She goes, does that mean I've got to buy the baby a coat then? You know, not understanding that the child clearly needed a coat, but the simple thing of thinking the child's not going to feel the cold because, you know, all those little things. Sometimes it's innocence and not understanding it rather than actually deliberately. Or sometimes, again, it's just not able to read the needs or, you know, empathize with others. So it's pretty complex neglect. But this is an indicator for you, really. And when we know it really impacts on the child's future development or current development, okay? And also thinking about the whole family as well, the whole family approach. And I mentioned pregnancy at the start. So we know, I know in England, if a lady's pregnant and goes to the GP has to ask that question around how they are in the pregnancy and, you know, and also are they safe? Because research has told us that, again, they are at risk of domestic abuse and control for some people when they fall pregnant in a way where, again, they are with child, etc. And even in the private sector that happens. I've done a bit of work with a few BUPA clinics, and again, that's also the same conversation. They have to ask, and they try to get the person on their own as well, hence the partner leaves the room. So it's just important that we recognise that. And if you've got any cases that you're worried about bubbling up, i.e. child in need kind of element, once, if the parent then falls pregnant or has, you know, with child in that time, that in itself would escalate it to a Section 47. So in a Section 47, it's when actually we believe that child is in immediate danger based on potential domestic abuse or neglect through addiction, whatever it might be. So it's just remembering sometimes if you've got that really complex case where the threshold is high and this family also, you find out apparently mum's expecting, it's worth going back to social care, because that in itself could be enough to bring it up another peg to a threshold. Not always, but it's very valuable information. Because again, if the person's still living with the potential perpetrator or still associated to the dealing or the whatever it might be, substance misuse or addiction, then that's definitely a factor we'd be concerned about the impact of the unborn baby. And also basic care. I know poverty's definitely hit quite a lot of places, definitely in United Kingdom, should I say, and around the world, with furloughs and people's jobs, and even just generally the whole kind of credit system as well. So sometimes you're going to get neglect through poverty, and there's a thin line there, because I know in England definitely there is a welfare state system where money is provided by the state. However, housing is provided by the state, and we expect the family who's been provided the money to fulfill the needs of their children through that money. But I know that families are going to be in debt, and I know that they've got to pay off their debt as well as pay off other things. But also their child needs to be fed, the house needs to be warm, the child needs to be cared for medically, etc. So that's when we get involved, when clearly we know that's not the case, and the family are choosing to spend the money maybe on addiction, etc. So all those little things just to be mindful of. And again, we know years ago, a lot of settings used to have your late collection policy, didn't you? When parents didn't collect children by a certain time, we used to ring social care. And I remember sort of being on duty sometimes having 3 or 4-year-olds in the office with us because their parents hadn't returned to pick them up for whatever reason. And the thin line between then who's responsible for nurturing them in that time until we get hold of the parents, etc. So it's just being mindful of that. And again, with affluent neglect, or, again, multiculturalism, being mindful around all of the other factors that also come into that. So providing food, clothing and shelter, really important that, again, any families, what comes up sometimes is parents putting their children on particular diets, whether it's a particular diet that the family choose to put them on, i.e. Food preferences, where they're going to give the child supplements. And I've had a few cases where, again, a family have done that, but haven't given the supplements, and it impacted on the development of the child, and the child didn't thrive. So therefore it became potentially medical neglect or nutritional neglect, as well. So because it impacted on the child's health, which made it medical, and they needed kind of support and consultation around the liver and etc. So, they're the worst scenario ones I'm talking about, but there's a big build up there where through a family's belief system of how, and this particular woman, I say, she was a white woman. I'm saying that because she was a spiritual healer as well. And sometimes people see spiritual healers as kind of a cultural thing. And I've had spiritual healers of all kind of nations in my experiences of how people see the world. And this particular lady was connected to the spirits and the moon and the stars, etc. And she was kind of giving the children all this white food of energy, etc. And the children were were nutritionally in lots of ways suffering. So it's just being mindful of that. And also, yes.
We just had a question which is sort of pertinent to this point, and it's about how to get beyond staff not wanting to hurt a parent's pride by offering help such as coats or clothing, that sort of thing. I think that's quite an interesting question, because that obviously is a barrier to raising things, not wanting to offend or cause a difficult situation.
So if it's a nursery or a setting, so it depends if you're a lone worker, i.e. the childminder, or you're the nursery setting. So if you're a setting where, regardless, you're going to say when you start with that family, that actually we recycle things here, because children grow out of things so frequently. We recycle things here. So just to let you know, if ever you're in need of something, check our thing, please do, because we recycle it, we encourage it. So in that case of the child needing a coat, you can say, actually, I've noticed there's a really good coat that will fit him really well, or put it on the child to wear during the daytime, and then potentially, having it where it's fine, he can keep it. So it's just doing it in a very relaxed, distracted way, rather than making it a point of the child needs a coat. That makes sense? So again, a lot of families do have pride, you're absolutely right, but the more proactive and open you are about hard times, especially now with lockdown and people's, a lot of schools are doing it too, where they're recycling, they're encouraging the year sixes when they leave to bring their uniform back, and they do a massive wash, etc. there's health and safety in that, don't get me wrong, and also you've got to do it above board, etc. But there's something where it really works, especially when you do believe that actually you've got like almost like lost property basket again, where you're making it much more around actually coat fits in, where's it here, keep it, it's fine. Again, you know, so it's just making it a very casual conversation rather than it's a problem. Okay.
Great,
Is that
thanks,
okay?
yeah, that's great. Thanks, Anne-Marie.
No problem. The third one about physical emotional harm is domestic abuse. And it's really important that we ensure adequate supervision. So there's been an increase of head trauma as well, children with head trauma over lockdown again, and an increase of children going to A&E in a kind of delayed manner because of lockdown, where they've also had injuries, again, non-accidental injuries. So we know that there's certain people that shouldn't be around young children, children full stop, anyone who poses a risk to children, full stop. We know those people come in all guises as far as family, relatives, friends, even parents. So with that in mind, we have to be open-minded and say, right, if I'm nervous talking to this parent and they're really putting fear in me, and I see them look at that child and actually really, you know, kind of emotionally drain the child or belittle them. So we call it high criticism, low warmth. So rather than hide, oh, what have you done now? Don't be silly. Oh my gosh, it'll be, what have you done that for? I told you not to do it. All of that constantly, not good. You know, that's like emotional abuse on top of everything else, but neglectful, because we know children are going to make mistakes and we have to help them, and they lose things all the time. So if you're thinking that, I always say it's times 10 or 100 for that child. And therefore you've got to be mindful of, do you feel comfortable knowing that the child is going to be around that person behind closed doors? So always check that first and then speak to somebody about that, because if you're intimidated, how's that child going to feel in that environment? So making sure the person who's supervising the child is child-centered. So in social work, when we do assessments, we always make sure that there's at least one protective factor in every home. And the protective factor is a person that if there's an emergency or the child needs care, will, you know, unconditionally be there for the child. You know, if the child has got a relaxed person that any time they make a mistake, they wet themselves or they want to cry, they want to hug, that person understands the child's needs and will be there for them. Okay, that we always ensure that's in every assessment we do. And if it's not there, we get someone who can, i.e. it might be grandparent, it might be a family friend that we might say, okay, you need to visit. I remember when I managed the 0 to 5 team of a young girl, she was about 23, and she had learning needs. She went to like a special needs school with a violent partner, etc. But the point I'm making in this case was she couldn't read numbers well, and she didn't understand about the baby bottle. So in that, her gran was very close to her and lived in the kind of road behind her house. So we made a point of, in the initial care plan that we had, we actually, the nan was part of that, where she had to ensure that she set all the bottles up and marked it where the lady, you know, she did the bottles, for example. So we knew that she couldn't do it, but actually someone was helping her with it, and we were reviewing that. So it's just remembering that, you know, whoever's looking after the child, we know has to be a suitable person who's approachable and calm. Yeah, we're going to get angry sometimes, I get that, but not all the time, and can control themselves, and also are not going to take advantage of children. So I've had a few of these cases, apologies here, bit of a health warning. Sometimes some families are targeted because they're single parent families, where someone will say, you know, befriend them. I've had a few of these where befriend somebody, don't worry darling, you go to the pub, I'll look after your child, and then child sexually abused. So I'm just saying that because that does happen. That does happen. And it's quite disturbing. And some people target, you know, younger children as well, because they're non-verbal, all the other things there. So please, please, you know, one of my warning signs is sometimes parents who make weak decisions. So I remember a case where happened on a few occasions where parent made weak decisions and had multiple partners in a short space of time that all accessed her children. And we then found out that some of those partners knew each other and knew that she was an easy target, almost like a ring, a pedo ring sort of stuff. I know it sounds ugly saying it, but we have to think the unthinkable. And if you were setting and you notice that she had quite frequent partners and they had access to children and they didn't know them, because children are genuine. If they don't know someone, you'll pick that up. Like, oh, I don't really understand you. Or they might run off with them quicker and you'll be thinking, they're a stranger, they don't know them. So all those little things for you are things that you would note. So when you do eventually come to me in social care, you'll say, actually, we are concerned about mum. She's made, made a few weak decisions, or it could be dad, whoever it might be, the partner, the parent. And we've noticed that, they make friends quite easily, and the friends come round and look after the children, she's not there, whatever it might be, or paid up some of her debt. So this whole county lines or child criminal exploitation, I've heard quite a few cases of, again, parents who've been targeted, who've been cuckooed, i.e. someone will move in, pay off their debt, look after their children, and, that will be more organised crime rather than sexual abuse. But the same thing there, where they're just vulnerable and they make weak decisions, and then they've got potential drug dealers or people who are unpleasant characters in their home who are bringing risk to the children, potentially gang affiliation, blah, blah, blah. So all those things are neglectful. And again, when it goes to child protection, that might be the category they name it under neglect. And again, I suppose the medical part, again, ensuring that children get their treatment quicker than they should, i.e. immediately. I'll send you the link to this clip. I haven't got time to show it because I've been talking too much, but it's about circle of security. It's a really good clip. It's an American clip, and it just highlights that parents need to be there for children, to capture them when they fall, fill their emotional cup, make them feel good about themselves. The sooner the better, then the attachment's formed, rather than shout at them when they get things wrong. So it's really detailed. It's a very good clip called Circle of Security. It's on YouTube. And it's amazing. I think I got it at a conference I went to a few years ago, but it's really powerful. Again, show it to your staff and insets. It really brings home what we need, the detail around nurturing of children, especially 0 to 5, in and understanding we do our best, but best has to be good enough rather than not good enough. I won't show it. This is a classic. So just to let you know, all of you, again, in early years, we know you have to ensure that you know about early help. Again, it's a word that's been batting around in education for about 5 years. We used to call it the CAF. Some of you might remember the Common Assessment Framework. We used to call it that because we learned it from the Climbier inquiry, that what could be done sooner to prevent it from escalating. So multi-agency working, threshold hasn't been met, but we're doing something to support a family. So that's expected from you guys, again, even if you're a lone worker, like I said, being the childminder, you're picking up something of a concern. It could be speech and language delay. It could be social cues, whatever it might be, name it, to say, actually, have you thought about taking to get a test, or, they've got whatever it might be. And they should say, actually, thanks for telling me that. I'm going to act on it because you're looking out for my child. So all of you have signed up for the welfare of the child is paramount, okay? Which means the duty of care we have as professionals working with young children or children up to the age of 18. So on the right here, we expect basic care to be provided. We expect the family to ensure safety for the child, including kitchen, bathroom, wherever, but also people who visit the home. So we do query those ones where I heard recently of a little 2-year-old who burnt their fingers on mummy's tongs, GHDs, whatever you want to call it. And the hospital was saying, how did it happen? And I think the child pretended to put it on because they see mummy do it every day, and then was trying to do it, but then burnt their hand and burnt their ear, whatever. But the point I'm making is, you could argue, yes, a one-off, but you left some hot appliance potentially in the arms of a child. So all those little things are important. Again, emotional warmth is invisible, but I love it. Children need to feel loved. They need to feel wanted. So I remember years ago, there's a trend of that parenting style where the child cries himself to sleep. And we used to get phone calls of crying babies at night sometimes, and we look into that and they tell us that. But the thin line between, I'm still there for you, child, I love you, and you can feel my love for you, you feel valued, rather than a child constantly being criticized for getting things wrong. So emotional warmth is definitely something we really embed into our early years practice around children feeling they're wanted and loved and valued. Stimulation. So going back to the paid carers, yes, they can stimulate children, but we still expect the birth parents in that way, or the caregivers, or the parents, whoever they might be, adoptive parents, whoever they are, guardians, foster carers, to all provide genuine stimulation to the child in a child-centered way, not an adult way, by the way, okay? So it has to be pitched to the child that they feel kind of comfort and joy and part of a family. And that's where sometimes we get the scapegoat syndrome, where children are scapegoated for whatever reason. Might be, middle child, whatever it might be, or child who's just not liked in that family. And that's what you'd pick up. Compared to their siblings, this child stands out. Their clothes might be disheveled. They get shouted at more, get blamed for everything. And guidance and boundaries. So I've heard recently of young children attacking their parents, you know, how they're dealing with lockdown. But we know about overprotective parents, don't we? And we know about parents who put no rules down. So we're going to have the whole spectrum from, I grew up in a strict household, so my child can do what they want to do, to actually micromanaging. So with lockdown at the moment, a lot of settings are worrying about the impact that the cleanliness hygiene is going to have on children's mental health, like OCD and other things, or fabricated induced as well in that. So just little things to be mindful of. Stability. So children need to know where they're sleeping at night and who's going to take care of them ahead of the game. So when parents break up, sometimes we get that co-parenting, which is fine, but there's also something called parent alienation, where one of the parents isolates the children from the other parent. And now CAS, who's the courts that do kind of divorce and separation, they've identified that as emotional abuse now because it's impacting on that child and the relationship with the other parent. So again, it's something, Google it if you want more about parent alienation. So that's what parents or caregivers should be providing on the right. And on the left is how it impacts on children. So, you know, health, education, they're all there. Identity's there as well. So whether it's the mixed other child or child as they get older, who feels they're a different gender, you know, gender identity, all those things, you know, including they should be able to know who they are and how they belong to that family, as well as learning how to be independent themselves. And that's where sometimes you might pick up the overprotective parenting. And self-care skills as well, the whole thing about, you know, doing things in a way in the world themselves. So this is good for you to kind of pick up on what you expect from parents, but also what should be happening to children, how it impacts in a positive way. And we know some of those are missing on the right-hand side. So for example, if you said to me as a social work manager that little Johnny or little Mary is beyond parental control, I'd be worried. So I had a 5-year-old, I remember about 2015, towards the end of my front line. And I remember the phone call to say this child was beyond parental control. And I was like, okay. When we got more information, it was he had just been diagnosed with ADHD. His older brother was associated to a organised crime, i.e. gang. And this boy used to abscond and he's in awe of his big brother. So when we went there, he even smoked, you know, like his brother used to smoke, he used to smoke with his brother. And it was one where clearly we tried our best, but, you know, we got involved to try to ensure some safety and consistency for this family, where clearly the boy was not listening to his mum, hence health and safety, hence concerning that he put himself at risk outside the home and all the other things. So thin line between child lashing out to actually child respecting parents' authority to not. And again, you pick that up, nip it in the bud, speak to parents to say, actually, what they've just done there, they've just kicked you, you know, we need to sanction them on that because they clearly need to learn that actually that behavior is not acceptable and how you manage your anger in a different way. But remembering children are also going to mimic what they see at home as well sometimes. So quick plug here, only because in the world, there's Australia ahead of us for safeguarding. We're second in the UK, and then third is USA. So this is from a colleague in Australia, talks about you, me, and empathy. So the more we encourage children talking about feelings, about how they hurt others and reflect on it, they're more able to tell you how they feel about lots of other things. Okay, so that's a really good one, you, me, and empathy. And helping children to talk out about things, again, being resilient as well. So teaching resilience is a good one as well. So these are kind of little things that kind of encourage children to understand themselves. And the beautiful book, again, multicultural, but also global, around For Every Child, Rights of the Child, Unicef. And the one that I love is this picture. You know, if you Google it, you can see it actually on as it comes out as a PDF, and you can download it. And I know She Settings have turned this one into a picture of no one's got the right to hurt you, not even your mum and dad. So in promoting child safety, child protection, but also preventing neglect, it's looking at what can we do to kind of work with families sooner when we're concerned about things. And again, here we've just got an overview. It's quite UK based, apologies, but giving you again the overview of things to look out for, from being unkempt to being left home alone for a while, unexplained injuries or injuries that are not treated properly, stealing, lying, all those other things, but also being so young. Sometimes it's the frozen look as well, when they don't respond to when the parents are around them. or when they go off with anyone. There's loads of indicators there. Go back to the classics of, child observation, and just reminding you again of, you're going to get children with bruises. We want to know about bruises. How did the child do it? Consistent injuries, to again being neglectful where it's not being treated. So the 5 R's, recognizing it, reminding staff every year through your annual training about the challenges of neglect. The sooner someone spots something, they should be notifying you, hence recognize it. Responding is informing the safeguarding lead or the room leader, and then reporting it to the person who records it, and then what are you going to do with that information to try and support that family in that particular challenge. Okay, any questions? So I know we've got a few questions. I'll give myself some time.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Anne-Marie.
I just have the last slide before the questions, and I can finish it then. Is that all right?
Yeah, of course, go ahead.
The last slide from me to you is, well, what can we do about it? Clearly, I can't just say all this without giving you kind of an overview. So definitely think the unthinkable, and it could happen here. So with having that in your mindset, potentially you're going to now be in doubt more than you were before. Maybe you all knew about neglect, but neglect is like the little drip. You get the odd drip here, you're going to see little bits of it, put it all together, and it slowly piles up, where actually when you start looking at the chronology, you've got lots of information about what's going on in a household or in a family or to a child. So making sure you've got the right reporting systems and recording as well. So if you're doing pieces of paper, it's all filed in a central place. People know they come to you immediately, not when the child's gone home, etc., etc. Challenge, i.e. have a system where all staff need to know, what do I do when I have a concern? Do I speak to parent first or come to you as a safeguarding person? And as soon as a problem emerges, that's when we try to engage, or we do engage. Hence try, we need their consent. If they don't consent, it's not a problem. We will still continue with our support. And then slowly it will get to the point of a crisis. And that's when you'll be bringing children's social care under a child Section 17 assessment. So I'll encourage you to have a courageous conversation. And it's very awkward, but we need to have a courageous conversation when we believe that a child is subject to harm in a neglectful way. And there's easy correction to be done if they're not aware of it, because sometimes people just think kids are only small. But it's just being mindful that our remit is to be the advocates for little ones, and thinking about the lived experience of children. Okay, questions now, is that okay?
Yeah, that's great. So first question we have is, what would you do if a parent regularly drops a child off in the morning smelling of alcohol, but the child seems fine and looks well and is well looked after generally?
I would have that conversation. That's a common one. I've had, as you say that, I've got about 10 cases, ching, 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 in my face now. And it was definitely that. It was child and parent, the stale smell of alcohol. If it was a one-off, i.e. 50th birthday party, one could argue, yes, normally actually as a family, that's not a problem. But if it's continuously, the chances are there's somebody in that household who drinks a lot that is going through their pores now. So when it goes through their pores, hence it's now smelling the clothes, okay? It's just that stale smell, the old pub smell we used to get many years ago in the carpet, etc. So it's definitely something to challenge in a good way. So you'll say, we've noticed that on a few occasions we can smell a strong odor, and it's done sensitively, so it might be, is everything okay? And try to look for evidence of a person who's displaying substance misuse addiction. So again, looking out for the impact that's having on the child, try to get the parent in more, and then say, I need to be honest with you, on a few occasions I have smelled alcohol, but saying it sensitively, and I'm here to support you if there's anything I can help you with, but I am monitoring it, and I let you know that, if you have got, the challenge, we can support you and help you, but clearly, our focus is on your child. And if we can see that this is impacting on your child, then we'll have to have that conversation with you. So they're aware of it, because the classic is those families who have addictions, sometimes they drink lots of mouthwash and spray lots of perfume, and they come to you sometimes an interesting fume that actually is covering up the alcohol smell, but they're trying to cover it up.
Yeah.
But have the conversation, please, and record it as well. So record it as in the time you had the conversation, with who and how you're going to follow it up, and then follow it up. And then if it does turn to child protection one day, you'll have evidence that you spoke to the person about it. And if they've got a partner or the second person on the list who you believe is supportive, and you get no joy with the first person, potentially again you might be thinking, if you know the other person, again to kind of see any other thing you might pick up on about what else could be going on.
Great, thank you, Anne-Marie. That's really helpful. I hope that helps. When a childminder has referred a case to social services, how often should they be updated with progress? I was made to feel it was no longer my concern when I did a referral.
Okay, so the magic trick in that is when you ring into us, we have duty workers and the phones ring constantly. So you are, and don't take this in a bad way, but in a good positive way of knowing the system, you'd have to ring back and be almost say, okay, I made a referral this morning. Is there any progress on it? So get the name of the person you spoke to and what time you called, because when you ring the duty worker, it might be a different person. You'll say, I spoke to Sam Jones at 9:50 this morning. What's the outcome of the referral? And then if it's an assessment that they haven't come back to you on, again, you can ring the duty worker. So every social work team has a duty system where you can ring a duty social worker. So as a manager, that was one of the things I had to do, was for the next 3 months, we had a rota of who's on duty every day. So if you ring the allocated worker, they're not there, speak to the duty worker, who will then look into the system to find out the progress on the case. Okay, so you can get progress on the case. However, you might not get detail. So we can't tell you the nitty gritty, but we can say there's a home visit last night, whatever, or the allocated worker is, but we can't give you detail. Yeah, so it is. So the more you ring them and speak to the duty worker, you want an outcome, because you're seeing the child every day. You want to know, has there been any interaction, whatever. Okay.
Yeah. Great. Okay.
No
Okay. Would you say that conversations with parents about concerns need to be done without the child in earshot? It can be tricky to separate them, you know, when you're doing a pick-up, drop-off situation. But surely it's better if children aren't present for those conversations.
Absolutely, absolutely. So what you might want to say is, I know it's hard because you don't want to put them off and put fear in them. You need to do it casually, almost like when you know you want to speak to, like, you know, Mr. B, Miss A, Mr. B. When they're coming in, look out in that room when you know, at the end of the day, what time they come. Get your room leader or whatever to tell you when they've arrived, and then potentially before the child's released, you're going to just take the parent aside. Does that make sense? So do it in a way where you're doing like a team approach to it. So rather than in the day the child's discharged and it's too late to do it in the playground or on the street or wherever on the door, you're doing it where the room leader knows when, you know, blah, blah, blah parents come, can you just let me know? And I want you to kind of stay with the child. I just want to take them aside. So there's still kind of childcare provided.
Okay.
I know that might be difficult for timing if it's like the last child there, but it's just more about there is somebody stimulating the child in a different room away from the parents. It could be just be behind the door so the child can see them, but, you know, potentially not in earshot.
Yeah, I mean, things are slightly different at the moment anyway with the whole COVID situation and drop-offs, but that's good sort of general advice, I think. What would you do about a parent who self-harms and the child is aware of this, but doesn't see it happen? What could you do in that circumstance?
You're not going to like my opinion on this. So what can I get that? I got that a lot on the front line. And my concern is that it could then turn into a learnt behavior. The child might think that's how you cope. Okay. And I appreciate people are in crisis. I really get that. But if the child's exposed to it, then that is concerning, you know, like any other type of concern or harm or abuse. So therefore it needs to be flagged up, definitely with, if you believe the parent is going to overreact, then speak to social care first to say, right, this is the situation. Hopefully the social care would be aware of the family. If they're not, they now are. And then you've got to think about immediate danger to the child. So do you think that parent is at high risk of suicide or something else? And unfortunately, again, sorry to be the damper on this, in my career over the last, say, 15 years, 5 years before I came off the front line, there was a model of, if I can't have my children, no one else can. And people taking their own lives and their children's lives. Okay. So sometimes in that kind of crisis of mental health challenge, in a crisis of not absorbing and getting the help, sometimes people do things. So you've got to think of serious cases you had on those ones, that what didn't you do, or, you know, based on you knew this was happening and you didn't inform or try to refer, whatever. So on those ones, alarm bells for that one you've just told me, because if it gets worse, or if you know it's happening and even the parents talking to the child about it, it's still emotional abuse, because kids shouldn't be exposed to that anyway. So it's doing it sensitively, and I respect that, but I definitely would have the conversation with social care on that one.
Yeah. I mean, is that the same for any type of sort of self-harm in a way? You know what, that could be different other types, but not necessarily self-harm is what I'm saying.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
if it's like alcohol abuse,
Alcohol abuse,
self-harm, yeah,
drug
yeah,
abuse.
definitely. Because when
Yeah.
it gets to the point, so like I said earlier on, the first point is there should be a person in every house who is the go-to person for that child. And if that person is not emotionally available for a child through whatever, meaning domestic abuse, mental health, or substance misuse, that's concerning. So the carer has to be mentally available for children. And if they're not, then there has to be someone else that has to be. But ideally, it should be the birth parents. That makes sense.
Yeah.
And yeah, ideally, it should be the birth parents, clearly, because they are the go-to people. And a lot of families are very good and supportive with rallying round and helping out auntie, uncle, whatever. I get that. But if that's done internally and it doesn't impact on the child, great. But it can't be. So sometimes we'll have those parents having supervised contacts with their children because we know that the parents are unable to manage their addiction, whatever it might be, you know?
Yeah.
So definitely something where you might need more interventions, definitely, because they're unable to control it, and the child can't do that, and there might be a young carer, you know, they might blame themselves. It's quite worrying. So definitely something to refer those ones.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
No problem.
I'm conscious it's coming up to 9 o'clock. We've only got a couple of questions left, so I will continue if that's okay. We'll just try and just get through a couple more. If a child is placed on the at-risk register and put into a home, how do we ensure that the child is placed in a safe home?
Okay, so when you said home, so we call it the child protection plan. And if they're in a home, they're either, so when we go to a section 47, a child is seen, meaning the threshold's been met and we don't need consent. So section 17, we need consent. And if we don't get consent, we can't do much. But they're the ones where it's not immediate danger, but it will impact on the child long term, like the toxic trio stuff I mentioned, but not in a crisis. But with section 47, it means significant harm has happened or about to happen. So with those ones, we normally would say the child can't be here tonight. So either the children's access, the children need consistency. So we normally opt for family, friend, or relative, preferably paternal or maternal. If the child stays there in the interim while we do the assessment, then we give these families a written agreement. And also we do a police check on the homes. So we do a police check before we authorize it. And then we give them a contract to say, which is only a Word document, meaning it's not a legal binding thing, but we say to them, the child's not to have access with the child, you know, unsupervised contact, blah, blah, blah. You know, you're going to be the main carer, liaise with the nursery, blah, blah, blah. You as a nursery or a colleague working early years would also be notified about the changes, and you'll be given the name of the social worker, etc. So going to the original question, they're normally safe because the social worker, if they're involved, would have done a check on the family. Okay, or looked after children. Foster carers are DBS checked, and also they are monitored. They've got their own supervising social worker, and then the child would have their own social worker, and they work together independently about supporting each other in that home.
Okay, thanks. That's great. Thank you for that.
No
So I'm going to merge the last two questions from Jennifer and Evelyn into one, because I think they're sort of trying to get on to ask the same sort of thing. So Jennifer is asking about her setting, which keeps cause for concern notes about a child, but they don't then call it through to social services until they've gathered, you know, various notes about a child. So they wait a while. And then I've got a question from Evelyn saying, how do you ensure you're assessing a child's situation accurately?
Okay.
You know, and not jumping to the wrong conclusion.
All right. Okay.
I guess the question is about how do you know is enough before you start to make a referral?
So schools have something called Operation Encompass. And Operation Encompass is every time the police are called to a home, now schools are notified, but they don't know the detail. So the point I'm making, go back to these questions, is you are a non-statutory agency in early years. Okay. The only statutory agencies are health, police, and social care. So one thing that was very, very common as a social work manager was, if I'm at my desk now on my system, the data, you're ringing up about little Mary, little Johnny, you don't know anything about them besides what the family have told you. On my system, I've got where they lived before, what they're involved in, I've got police. So now in MASH, as you know, we've got police colleagues, we've got health colleagues, it's multi-agency. So I've got all the information that you wouldn't know. So what used to happen a lot was that nursery would ring up about that one thing, being not sure, And believe me, that little bit of information would complete the whole concern I'd have, and I'd escalate at section 47. So please, please think about what you don't know rather than you do know. And the classic are, we found, you know, affluent families or families who want to hide things are very good at doing that. And you only hear out the real stuff, i.e. the facts, when you're invited to initial child protection conference after section 47. That's the first time formally that you'll hear about the history of the family from the police, from social care, and from health, okay? Whether it's mental health, whatever. So in there, I've done it deliberately that way to remind you that actually you need to overshare than undershare, because you don't realize that they're going to school soon, that kid. And this is like a chronology started. And your children being 0 to 5, they have no filters. So you're more likely to get more information. And on that, before we go, I remember, I think 2 weeks ago, a comment of a drug raid on a family, and somebody in the setting then said, oh, I remember the child talking about daddy sells tablets to his friends and didn't think anything of it. It felt like paracetamol rather than drugs. So that's an example. Do you understand? So remember, it's what you don't know the more that you do know. And again, serious case review would be, why didn't you ring the authorities? Because every time you're involved in a serious case review, they will seize all agencies' records and look at them. And if you've got information that they're not aware of, believe me, you're at fault because you didn't share information. So remember that oversharing is much better. Okay? Hope that helps.
Super. Now, we have had a couple of questions in about specifics. Or I'm sorry we don't have time to answer those, but I would sort of encourage you to apply the general principles that Anne-Marie has put forward tonight for how to deal with those specific problems. So again, apologies, we can't really have time to deal with those, but and a huge thank you to Anne-Marie for going through so much tonight. I've gotten lots of comments about how helpful and informative, and you know, people think that they know a little bit, you know, they feel reasonably comfortable with this subject, but they're all saying, you know, how much they've learned. So I am just in that respect just going to try that second poll just to see how you are feeling in terms of child protection and child abuse now. So
that's nice.
Great to see a lot of you feeling a lot more confident. That's brilliant.
Thank you.
Wonderful stuff, Anne-Marie. We'd love to have you on again. I think a Q&A actually might work really well. So thank you for that.
No problem.
Great having you with us.
No problem.
If you could just move the slide on, I'll just remind everybody about the webinar we're having next week. Oh, you've gone too far. That's it. We're taking it down a notch next week. And we're talking about forest schools and specifically how you can introduce the ethos of forest schools into your early years setting. So we've got a really nice session planned on that. Whilst I remember, Anne-Marie, people did ask for a list of the books that you held up.
No problem.
And also we'll send out a link to the video as well. So we'll send that in your email tomorrow along with your certificate. So thank you for your patience while we get that organized tomorrow. And thank you everybody for joining us. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you found it very, very useful and helpful. I'm sure you have. And just a final thanks to Anne-Marie. That's been great.
No problem. Thank you. And, you know, good luck in your journeys. And again, my details are all there on the slide. Email me if you've got any questions. Not a problem. Good luck with everything.
That's brilliant. You're a star. Thank you, Anne-Marie. Take care, everybody. See you again soon.
No problem. Thank you.
Bye. Bye.